Imagine standing on the banks of the Indus River 5,000 years ago as the ancient city of Mohenjo-Daro thrives in its prime. The air is thick with the scent of spices, while traders from distant lands barter goods in bustling markets. In this forgotten civilization, innovations in engineering, writing, and urban planning were already shaping the future. But as quickly as it rose, this great city, and others like it, vanished, leaving behind only whispers in the dust. What caused this sudden disappearance, and how did it pave the way for the rise of the mighty empires, philosophers, and dynasties that would define India's history? This is just the beginning of a story that spans millennia, filled with battles, conquests, cultural revolutions, and the birth of one of the world's oldest and most diverse civilizations. Welcome back to Da History Guy. In today's video, I will take you through the timeline of the history of India, from its earliest civilizations to the rise of empires, the arrival of new religions, the dramatic shifts in power, and the influence of colonialism. First, we'll explore the ancient Indus Valley, one of the world's earliest urban civilizations, and unravel the mysteries of its sudden disappearance. From there, we'll move into the Vedic period, where new social and religious ideas began to take root. Next, we'll dive into the rise of the Mauryan and Gupta empires, an era of unmatched cultural and intellectual achievement. As we journey through the medieval period, we'll look at the Delhi Sultanate, the rise of the Marathas, and the profound influence of the Mughal Empire. And finally, we'll explore the arrival of European powers and the establishment of British colonial rule, which reshaped the very fabric of Indian society. Before we dive into this fascinating journey, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on any of our deep dives into history. Let us know where you're watching from in the comments. We love hearing from our global community. And for those of you who haven't subscribed yet, we'd really appreciate it if you could share why in the comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts.
India, as a land, has always been a place of contradictions, vast and diverse, ancient yet continuously evolving. It is a land that has witnessed the birth of civilizations, the rise of philosophies, and the ongoing dialogue between tradition and innovation. Yet, the story of India's origins begins not in the grandeur of kings or dynasties, but with its first people, the ones whose footprints shaped the very soul of this land. Long before the dawn of the great empires that we recognize today, the Indian subcontinent was home to people who had lived here for tens of thousands of years. From the Adivasi tribes, whose ancestors likely lived on this land for more than 30,000 years, to the first settled agriculturalists along the riverbanks, India's early history is woven with complexity and intrigue. These first inhabitants, often described as indigenous, lived in a world far removed from the kingdoms, temples, and cities that would follow. They were the original stewards of the land, living in harmony with their environment, slowly shaping their societies and cultures. They passed their knowledge orally, with stories about the land, the plants, and the animals, which would be passed down through generations. Though their tools and artifacts have survived, much of their story remains hidden in the gaps of history. Archaeological evidence of their existence is sparse, but it's clear that these early people were incredibly resilient, living off the land and adapting to the changing environment. They were not a single monolithic group, but a diverse set of tribes, each with its own unique culture and way of life, contributing to the broader story of India's first human societies. The first great civilization to emerge on the Indian subcontinent was the Indus Valley Civilization, which flourished between 3300 BCE and 1300 BCE. Stretching across modern-day Pakistan and parts of India, it is one of the oldest known urban cultures in the world. The Indus Valley cities, such as Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, were marvels of urban planning. Unlike many of their contemporaries, the people of the Indus Valley constructed cities with wide streets, advanced drainage systems, and well-organized residential and commercial areas. These cities are a testament to the sophisticated nature of the civilization, reflecting a high degree of social organization and technical expertise. But what truly stands out about the Indus Valley is its mystery. Unlike other ancient civilizations, no clear evidence exists of a centralized ruling power, and their written script remains undeciphered to this day.
The economy of the Indus Valley was deeply intertwined with trade. Evidence suggests that the people of the Indus Valley traded goods with neighboring civilizations, including Mesopotamia. This exchange of materials, like gold, ivory, and lapis lazuli, illustrates their extensive trade networks. Yet, despite its advanced systems, the civilization collapsed around 1900 BCE, likely due to a combination of climatic changes, river shifts, and perhaps internal societal upheaval. Was it environmental factors that led to the downfall, or did the people of the Indus Valley simply fade into the landscape? Some scholars suggest they migrated to other parts of the subcontinent, merging with emerging cultures in the Vedic period. As the mighty Indus Valley receded into the pages of history, new groups began to settle in the northern regions of India. The Aryans, a group of Indo-European-speaking peoples, began migrating into the subcontinent around 1500 BCE. Their arrival marked the beginning of the Vedic period, one of the most transformative phases in Indian history. The Vedic texts, primarily the Rig Veda, formed the foundation of Hinduism and outlined the early social and religious structures of Indian society. The Aryans brought with them a distinct way of life, nomadic in nature, but soon settling into agricultural communities. Over time, the Vedic people developed a rigid social structure, which would evolve into the caste system that would dominate Indian society for centuries to come. The Brahmins, or priests, held the highest status, while the Kshatriyas, warriors, Vaishyas, merchants, and Shudras, laborers, filled the lower tiers of this hierarchical system. The Vedic period was also a time of great philosophical and religious innovation. As the Aryans settled and adapted to their new environment, they began composing hymns and rituals to honor the gods of nature, fire, wind, and water. Over time, these rituals became formalized into religious practices, and the ideas of dharma, karma, and moksha began to take shape. These concepts would form the core beliefs of Hinduism, influencing the spiritual fabric of India for millennia. While the Vedic period is known for the development of a deep and rich spiritual tradition, it also saw the formation of powerful kingdoms in the Gangetic Plains, particularly the kingdom of Magadha. It was here, in the lush river valleys, that India's first great empires would eventually emerge, creating a political and cultural center that would dominate much of Indian history. The early people of India, from the Adivasi tribes to the Indus Valley inhabitants and the Vedic Aryans, created a foundation that would carry through the rise of the great Mauryan and Gupta empires and beyond. Their influence on India's spiritual, social, and political structures can still be felt today. The mysteries of the Indus Valley may never be fully understood, but their legacy remains embedded in India's agricultural practices, trade networks, and urban development. Similarly, the Vedic period, though a time of upheaval and change, set the stage for the spiritual and philosophical traditions that would guide India for centuries. In the early history of India, we see the seeds of what would become one of the world's most enduring civilizations, one marked by remarkable resilience, cultural diversity, and deep philosophical insight. The people of India's early history did not simply survive, they thrived, adapting to and shaping their environment in ways that would lay the groundwork for the empires,
kingdoms, and dynasties that would follow. As we continue this journey through India's history, we will see how these early foundations blossomed into something far greater, setting the stage for the rise of empires, religions, and ideas that would reverberate through time, shaping not just India, but the world as a whole. Before the rise of India's monumental empires, before the scriptural hymns of the Vedic period, and even before the first urban centers of the Indus Valley Civilization, the subcontinent was already inhabited by one of the world's oldest, most diverse communities, the Adivasi peoples. The term Adivasi, meaning original inhabitants, refers to the diverse indigenous groups of India whose roots stretch back thousands of years, long before the advent of the great dynasties that would later dominate the Indian subcontinent. They were the land's first stewards, living in relative isolation and preserving a profound connection to nature. These early people were semi-nomadic, shifting their settlements with the seasons, yet their societal structures, ways of life, and wisdom would form a critical foundation upon which later Indian societies would build.
The lifestyle of the Adivasi people was intricately tied to the land they lived on. Unlike the agrarian societies that would later dominate India, the early Adivasi people practiced a form of sustainable living that was rooted in hunting, gathering, and shifting agriculture. Their survival was linked to a cyclical understanding of nature's rhythms. They knew when to plant, when to harvest, and how to take only what the land could offer. Their intimate relationship with the forest, mountains, rivers, and wildlife allowed them to develop an acute awareness of ecological balance. This deep ecological knowledge was not merely practical, but was woven into their spiritual beliefs. For the Adivasi, the forest was not a resource to be exploited, but a sacred entity to be revered. Trees, rivers, and animals were not seen as separate from human life, but as equal participants in the web of existence. Sacred groves, for instance, were carefully preserved by Adivasi communities, where specific trees and plants were protected due to their religious significance. This early form of sustainable forestry ensured the preservation of biodiversity long before conservation became a global priority. In the absence of written records, the story of the Adivasi peoples has survived through oral traditions, songs, stories, and rituals passed from generation to generation. These accounts offer glimpses into the daily lives, struggles, and triumphs of these early people. Yet they also highlight the challenges historians face when attempting to study such communities. The Adivasi's oral history is rich in symbolism, carrying forward not just cultural practices but also profound philosophical insights. Through stories and songs, they preserved the myths of creation, the tales of the first ancestors, and the teachings of their spiritual elders. These traditions, though often dismissed by colonial historians, carry valuable insight into the social structures, egalitarian communities, and spiritual beliefs that characterize their lives. Their rituals, songs, and dances, performed around the hearth or in sacred groves, remain a living testament to their enduring presence. Modern-day anthropologists and ethnographers are often left to piece together this vast oral history, which remains largely fragmented and localized to specific communities. Yet it is precisely through these oral traditions that we begin to understand the richness of Adivasi culture, how they interacted with each other, with neighboring tribes, and crucially, with the evolving societies that encroached upon their lands. Despite their resilience, the Adivasi people's connection to the land would face immense challenges as the tides of history shifted around them. With the rise of large agricultural empires and the increasing centralization of power, the Adivasis were often pushed to the margins of the growing urban world. As kingdoms and empires began to spread across the subcontinent, whether the Mauryas, the Guptas, or the Mughals, these communities found themselves on the fringes of society. sometimes viewed as outsiders or primitives by the expanding states. The expansion of agriculture, the rise of cities, and the introduction of new political systems often led to the displacement of Adivasi groups. Forests were cleared for agricultural use, and lands that once belonged to these early inhabitants were seized or repurposed by growing kingdoms. This pattern of displacement, which began long before British colonization, would continue throughout India's history. Over time, the Adivasi communities were pushed into more remote regions where they clung to their traditions, fighting to preserve their way of life. Despite these pressures, however, the Adivasi people did not vanish. Instead, they adapted, resisted, and retained their cultural identity. The Adivasi resistance movements of the 19th and 20th centuries, especially against British colonial rule, are a testament to their determination to survive and preserve their ancestral land. While the Adivasi peoples have often been relegated to the margins of historical narratives, their contributions to Indian culture are profound and enduring. Their artistic traditions, from intricate tribal art to vibrant folk dances, continue to shape India's cultural landscape. The Pithora paintings of Gujarat, the Warli art of Maharashtra, and the Dokra metal crafts of West Bengal are just a few examples of how Adivasi art has influenced contemporary Indian culture.
Moreover, their knowledge of medicinal plants has been invaluable to Indian medicine. The Adivasis' traditional healing systems, often based on the use of plants and herbs, were the foundation of what would later be integrated into Ayurvedic practices. Their understanding of the natural world, the cycles of seasons, and the medicinal properties of local flora remain crucial to modern practices in organic farming, herbal medicine, and sustainability. Today, the Adivasi peoples continue to face challenges. In the face of modernity and urbanization, many have been forced to confront new realities that threaten their way of life. Yet, through the preservation of their oral histories, their rich artistic traditions, and their continued resistance to displacement, they have maintained a link to the ancient past, a past that is integral to the broader story of India's civilization. The Adivasi peoples were not merely passive witnesses to the rise of India's great empires, but were active participants in the land's ecological, cultural, and social history. They are a reminder that history is not only written by kings and conquerors, but also by the lives of the people who lived quietly but profoundly, shaping the land around them. Their story, though often overshadowed, remains one of resilience, wisdom, and continuity, a story that is crucial for understanding the full tapestry of India's rich past. At its peak, around 2600 BCE, the Indus Valley Civilization was a world ahead of its time, an urban marvel that predated other ancient civilizations such as Mesopotamia and ancient Egypt by centuries. Unlike the grand monumental structures of Egypt or the ziggurats of Mesopotamia, the people of the Indus Valley left behind a legacy defined by the quiet elegance of urban planning and the practicality of everyday life. But beneath its surface of stunning achievements lies a mystery that has perplexed historians for over a century. How and why did this highly advanced civilization decline? The cities of the Indus Valley, Harappa, Mohenjo-Daro, Lothal, were not just centers of political and economic power, they were epitomes of urban innovation. These cities, laid out in a grid pattern with streets that intersected at right angles, were some of the earliest examples of planned urban development. This city layout was designed not just for convenience alone, but for efficiency, facilitating the smooth flow of goods and people. The width of the streets was carefully planned, wide enough for carts and traders, yet narrow enough to encourage communal interaction. But what truly set the Indus Valley apart was its sewage system, one of the most advanced of the ancient world. Each house, regardless of its size, had its own drainage system, which connected to larger, community-wide sewage channels made from baked bricks. The Great Bath of Mohenjo-Daro, likely a center for religious rituals, stood as a monument to the importance of cleanliness. The scale and sophistication of these systems suggest that the Indus people valued hygiene and public health to a degree that was unmatched by their contemporaries. Technology in the Indus Valley also stretched into the world of metallurgy, with copper, bronze, and gold being used for tools, jewelry, and religious symbols. This technological expertise, coupled with the advanced water management systems, indicated a well-organized society capable of managing complex systems to ensure the survival and prosperity of its urban population. While much of the focus has been on the infrastructure and technical brilliance of the Indus Valley, the lives of the people who inhabited these cities remain a mystery. These early residents were not just builders of cities, but creators of culture. Through small objects, such as clay seals and figurines, they have left us glimpses into their daily lives. Artisans fashioned beads from semi-precious stones, while potters created delicate pottery that was often decorated with geometric patterns. Sculptures of animals, bulls, elephants, and humped cattle show their close connection to the natural world. Socially, it is believed that the Indus Valley people may have had a relatively egalitarian society, with evidence of uniform housing structures suggesting no major social stratification. There was little evidence of grand palaces or monumental tombs, a stark contrast to the pyramids of Egypt or the ziggurats of Mesopotamia. This raises the question, was the Indus Valley a society that valued collective well-being over the glorification of individuals, or was this simply a reflection of a society still in its infancy?
Trade played a central role in the prosperity of the Indus Valley. The cities were connected not only by a sophisticated internal network of roads, but also by vast trade routes that stretched from the Persian Gulf to the heart of Mesopotamia. The Indus people traded goods such as cotton, beads, lapis lazuli, and copper, which were highly prized in neighboring civilizations. The port city of Lothal, located on the Saraswati River, stands as a testament to their maritime expertise. Excavations at Lothal revealed the presence of docks and warehouses, indicating that the people of the Indus Valley had a well-established system of shipping and trade. This connected them to Mesopotamia, where the famous Sumerian civilization had established their own bustling trade cities. The sudden collapse of the Indus Valley Civilization remains one of the most debated topics in ancient history. By 1900 BCE, the cities that had once stood as shining examples of urban ingenuity began to fall into ruin. But what caused such a rapid and profound decline? Several theories have been proposed to explain this fall. One of the most widely accepted is the climate change theory. The Saraswati River, which played a crucial role in the survival of the Indus Valley Civilization, began to shift course or dry up, making it difficult for people to sustain agriculture. The loss of water sources could have led to crop failures, food shortages, and the eventual abandonment of the cities. Environmental changes such as deforestation and soil erosion may have also contributed to the collapse. The Indus people, who had relied heavily on irrigation and agriculture, would have faced difficulty maintaining their crops and, by extension, their cities. Some scholars believe the deforestation of the surrounding areas for timber and fuel led to an ecological imbalance, further exacerbating the decline.
Another theory is that the decline was not solely due to environmental factors, but also internal issues. As the population grew and resources became scarcer, internal conflicts may have arisen. Social unrest, possibly driven by food scarcity or external threats, could have weakened the once great civilization. It's also possible that the Indus people migrated in search of more fertile lands, assimilating into the cultures of the Ganges Valley or other parts of the Indian subcontinent. Archaeological evidence shows that Aryan tribes may have interacted with the remnants of the Indus civilization, blending their culture with that of the Vedic peoples, who would later shape the cultural and religious landscape of India. Though the Indus Valley Civilization faded into history, its legacy endures. The urban planning, trade systems, and technological innovations pioneered by the Indus people laid the groundwork for future civilizations in the subcontinent. The cities they built may have crumbled, but the blueprint for city design, sanitation, and community planning lived on in later cultures. Moreover, the artifacts they left behind continued to intrigue historians. From mysterious seals to intricate pottery, these items offer clues to a civilization that, despite its sudden disappearance, had a profound and lasting impact on the cultural and economic landscape of the ancient world. The fall of the Indus Valley is a reminder of the fragility of human achievement, and yet its resilience, through the ways its people adapted to the changing world around them, ensures their place in history not as a civilization that simply disappeared, but as one that evolved into new forms, influencing generations to come.
As the sun rose over the vast plains of northern India around 1500 BCE, the once nomadic Indo-Aryan tribes, who had wandered for centuries, finally began to settle into permanent homes. These early settlers, often referred to as the Vedic peoples, embarked on a transformation that would shape the future of India. The shift from a semi-nomadic existence to an increasingly settled agricultural lifestyle marks the beginning of the Vedic period, a foundational era that would influence not only ancient India, but also the spiritual and philosophical traditions that still endure today. The early Vedic tribes, known for their love of the horse and chariot, were intimately connected to the land, relying both on their herds and the land's bounties. As they settled along the fertile plains of the Indus, Ganges, and Yamuna rivers, they began to cultivate crops such as barley, rice, and wheat, marking the dawn of Indian agriculture. Villages sprang up where once only wandering bands of hunters and herders had roamed. These villages became the cradles of Indian civilization, as the Aryans built simple yet effective irrigation systems to sustain their crops and thriving settlements. As their lifestyle transitioned, so too did their social and political structures. The once tribal, egalitarian society began to shift into a more structured hierarchy. This was reflected in the development of tribal councils led by chieftains or rajas, who gradually gained prominence as the society grew more complex. These early leaders would eventually give way to the development of kingship as we understand it, although the role of the king remained tied to the spiritual and ritualistic practices of the people. At the heart of this emerging society was the Vedic literature. The Rig Veda, Yajurveda, Samaveda, and Atharva Veda. These texts were not just religious scriptures, but comprehensive cultural documents that articulated the early Aryan worldview. The Vedas were passed down orally for centuries, meticulously preserved by priests, Brahmins, who committed vast portions of these hymns, prayers, and rituals to memory. These texts contain not only hymns of praise to gods such as Indra, Agni, and Varuna, but also some of the earliest philosophical reflections on the nature of existence, the cosmos, and the human soul.
The Vedic hymns spoke of Rita, the cosmic order, and of the need to align human actions with this divine order. These early religious texts did not just shape the ritualistic practices of the Vedic people, but laid the foundation for the core principles of Hinduism, especially ideas like karma, action and its consequences, and dharma, righteous duty. The Upanishads, which emerged from the later Vedic texts, expanded upon these ideas, delving into the nature of self, Atman, and Brahman, the ultimate reality. One of the most enduring legacies of the Vedic period was the Varna system, which later evolved into the rigid caste system that would dominate Indian society for centuries. Initially, the Varna system was relatively fluid, designed to organize society based on function. The Brahmins, priests and scholars; the Kshatriyas, warriors and rulers; the Vaishyas, merchants and farmers; and the Shudras, laborers and servants. Each of these groups had a specific role to play in maintaining the cosmic order and social harmony. Over time, however, the Varna system became increasingly rigid, giving rise to the complex system of hereditary castes that defined social mobility. This hierarchical structure was later codified in texts like the Manu Smriti, which governed social interactions and established rules for maintaining the purity of each caste. The evolution of the caste system would deeply shape not only social relations, but also economic and political life, creating a rigid framework that continues to affect Indian society today. The Vedic period was also marked by profound religious shifts. Early Vedic religion was heavily ritualistic, focusing on sacrifices and offerings to appease the gods who govern nature. The sacrificial fire, yajna, was central to these rituals, and the Brahmins played a crucial role in maintaining the sacred fire and performing elaborate sacrifices to ensure the welfare of society. However, as the Vedic period progressed, these rituals began to give way to more introspective religious practices. The Upanishads introduced new ideas about the soul, the nature of reality, and the pursuit of liberation, moksha, from the cycle of life and death. This philosophical shift laid the groundwork for later developments in Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism, all of which would challenge and expand upon the early Vedic teachings.
The Vedic period's impact on modern-day India cannot be overstated. The Vedic texts and the religious ideas they contained continued to shape the spiritual practices of millions. Hinduism, which emerged out of the Vedic tradition, remains the dominant religion in India today. Concepts such as karma, dharma, and moksha continue to guide the moral and ethical choices of individuals, while the caste system, though officially abolished, still influences social and cultural dynamics, particularly in rural areas. The philosophical traditions that began in the Vedic period have spread across the world, influencing not only Indian society but also global intellectual thought. The Vedic emphasis on knowledge and self-realization laid the foundations for the development of yoga and meditation, practices that have gained global popularity in recent decades. The Vedic period also contributed to India's rich cultural heritage, from its art and music to its literature and language. The Sanskrit language, which flourished during the Vedic period, remains the classical language of Indian literature and philosophy. The Vedic period was not just a time of change, it was the birthplace of the Indian way of life. From the rituals and hymns of the Vedic texts to the social structures that arose, the period set the stage for all that followed. The legacy of the Aryans, their philosophy, social organization, and spirituality continues to resonate in modern India, making the Vedic period one of the most important chapters in the history of the subcontinent. Through its teachings, practices, and enduring cultural contributions, the Vedic period remains a cornerstone of India's past, present, and future. The decline of the Indus Valley Civilization and the migration of the Vedic peoples represent two of the most pivotal moments in early Indian history. These events, which occurred roughly around 1900 BCE, set the stage for the rise of a new cultural, social, and religious order on the Indian subcontinent. While the Indus Valley Civilization was known for its advanced urban planning, technological marvels, and extensive trade networks,
The migration of the Vedic peoples introduced new cultural influences, laying the foundation for what would become Vedic Hinduism, Indian philosophy, and the caste system.
At its height, the Indus Valley Civilization boasted two of its greatest cities, Harappa and Mohenjo-daro. These cities were nothing short of architectural marvels. The grid-like streets, advanced drainage systems, and multi-storied buildings reflect an urban society that rivaled those of Mesopotamia and Egypt. Yet, by 1900 BCE, this once prosperous civilization began to crumble. Entire cities were abandoned, and by 1300 BCE, the Indus Valley was virtually deserted. Scholars continue to debate the causes of this decline, with three primary theories often taking the spotlight: climate change, environmental degradation, and social upheaval. 1. Climate change and the shifting rivers. A widely accepted theory points to climatic changes and the shifting course of rivers as key contributors to the decline. The Saraswati River, which was a major lifeline for the Indus Valley Civilization, began to change its course due to tectonic shifts or possibly gradual desertification. The loss of this river's water source would have devastated the agricultural systems that the civilization relied on for survival. As crops failed and water sources dwindled, the urban centers would have faced extreme hardship. 2. Environmental degradation. Another theory suggests that deforestation and soil erosion played a major role. As the cities expanded and agricultural practices intensified, the surrounding ecosystems may have been overexploited. Deforestation would have led to soil depletion, making it increasingly difficult to sustain large populations, further compounding the difficulties faced by the Indus people. 3. Social upheaval and internal strife. While there is no direct evidence of warfare, some scholars suggest that internal strife, perhaps the result of environmental pressures or economic instability, may have triggered the collapse. The gradual breakdown of the city-states could have led to social fragmentation, triggering migration or abandonment of urban centers. In any case, the fall of the Indus Valley Civilization was not a single catastrophic event, but likely a gradual process spurred by a combination of environmental and social factors. What remains undeniable is that by the time the Vedic peoples arrived, the Indus cities were already in decline, their once thriving trade routes no longer connecting the subcontinent with the rest of the ancient world.
As the Indus Valley faded into history, a new group began to make their way into the Indian subcontinent, the Vedic Aryans. These nomadic peoples, originally from the steppes of Central Asia, began their migration into the northern plains of India around 1500 BCE, marking the beginning of the Vedic period. The Vedic peoples were part of the larger Indo-European migration, a cultural and linguistic wave that spread across Europe and Asia. Unlike the urbanized, settled Indus Valley civilization, the Aryans were initially pastoral nomads. Their society was based on herding cattle, using the horse for both transportation and battle. They brought with them their language, Sanskrit, which would become the sacred language of Hinduism, and their spiritual traditions, which would form the foundation of Vedic religion. The migration of the Aryans into India has been a subject of considerable debate. There are two primary schools of thought. The Aryan invasion theory. This theory, once widely accepted, suggests that the Aryans invaded the Indian subcontinent, displacing or assimilating the indigenous Dravidian population. According to this view, the arrival of the Aryans brought with them their horse-drawn chariots and Vedic religious practices, which were imposed upon the existing societies. The Aryan migration theory. More recently, scholars have favored the idea that the Aryans did not invade, but rather migrated gradually into the Indian subcontinent over centuries. They moved along established trade and migration routes, eventually settling in the fertile river valleys of the Ganges and Yamuna.
This migration likely occurred over several waves, as the Aryans adapted to and integrated with the indigenous populations they encountered. While the theory of invasion has largely fallen out of favor, it's important to note that the Vedic Aryans did not come to India in isolation. They encountered existing tribal societies, many of whom were descendants of the Indus Valley Civilization and had their own established agricultural practices and spiritual traditions. The interaction between the Vedic Aryans and the indigenous peoples was multifaceted. In some regions, the Aryans likely assimilated with local tribes, adopting aspects of their cultures and religious practices. In other areas, they may have displaced or subjugated indigenous groups. The Dasa, or Dasa peoples, often referred to in the Vedas as the darker-skinned indigenous groups, were considered outsiders in the Vedic texts. These Dasa tribes lived in the forests and had a different social and religious structure. They were often depicted in the Vedic hymns as subjects or enemies of the Aryans.
However, this relationship was not solely one of conflict. Over time, the indigenous and Vedic cultures began to merge, leading to a syncretic religious and social system that laid the groundwork for Hinduism. The incorporation of local gods and rituals into the Vedic pantheon helped create a shared religious landscape, one that was fluid and adaptable to regional differences. As the Vedic Aryans settled into their new territories, they introduced a highly structured social system, which later evolved into the caste system. Initially, society was divided into four main groups: Brahmins, priests; Kshatriyas, warriors; Vaishyas, traders; and Shudras, laborers. Over time, these divisions became more rigid and hereditary, solidifying into the caste system that would shape Indian society for thousands of years. Religiously, the migration of the Vedic Aryans brought with it polytheism, with gods such as Indra, Agni, and Varuna at the center of their worship. Over time, these early Vedic deities would evolve into the Hindu pantheon, blending with the local deities and religious traditions. The Vedic hymns and sacrificial rituals set the stage for the religious practices that would become integral to Indian life, including the ideas of karma and moksha. The decline of the Indus Valley and the migration of the Vedic peoples were two monumental events that forever changed the course of Indian history. As the Indus Valley Civilization faded into obscurity, the Vedic Aryans brought with them new ways of thinking, new social structures, and new religious ideas that would shape the subcontinent for centuries. The interaction between the Aryans and the indigenous peoples set the stage for a dynamic, evolving cultural landscape, one that blended both new and ancient traditions. The Vedic period laid the foundation for Hinduism, the caste system, and the philosophical underpinnings that continue to define the Indian way of life. These early migrations were not just about the movement of people. They were the catalysts for a new cultural era, one that would shape the future of India and leave an enduring legacy on the world stage.
The Vedic peoples, who arrived in the Indian subcontinent around 1500 BCE, were a dynamic and complex society whose contributions to Indian civilization are still felt today. Though they began as nomadic herders, by the time they settled in the fertile river valleys of northern India, they had laid the foundations for what would become a rich and enduring cultural legacy. Their transition from pastoralists to agriculturalists was only the beginning of a series of transformative changes that would profoundly influence the social, religious, and political structure of India for millennia. The Vedic peoples were not initially bound to the land, but instead led a nomadic existence as herders and warriors, migrating with their cattle across the expansive northern plains. Their life was characterized by a mobile, tribal structure where the chieftain, or Raja, played an essential role in leading the tribe. the pastoral lifestyle required close ties to their animals, particularly horses and cattle, which were not only symbols of wealth, but also of spiritual importance. However, as the Vedic peoples moved into the fertile regions of the Indus and Ganges valleys, they began to adapt to a more settled lifestyle. The rivers provided a rich source of water, and the land proved ideal for the cultivation of crops like barley, wheat, and later rice. This shift was revolutionary. It marked the beginning of agricultural communities, which soon gave rise to permanent settlements and villages. Irrigation techniques and the use of iron tools, including plows, further enhanced agricultural productivity, allowing the Vedic peoples to thrive in one location. This transition to settled agriculture provided the economic foundation necessary for the next phase in Vedic society. It led to the development of social hierarchies and class distinctions, elements that would continue to shape Indian civilization for centuries. At the heart of the Vedic people's cultural identity were their religious beliefs, many of which would later form the core of Hinduism. The Vedas, a collection of hymns, rituals, and prayers, became the cornerstone of Vedic religion. These texts were more than just spiritual guides, they were the foundation of the cosmic order that governed the universe. The Rig Veda, the oldest of the Vedic texts, encapsulates the essence of this belief system, describing the creation of the universe, the role of gods, and the human connection to the divine.
The primary focus of Vedic religion was on ritual sacrifice, the performance of elaborate rituals to appease the gods and ensure the prosperity of the community. Agni, the fire god, played a central role in these rituals, with fire sacrifices seen as the most sacred of all. The Brahmins, the priestly class, were the custodians of these sacred rites, and their role as intermediaries between humans and the divine made them the most influential group in Vedic society. As the Vedic period progressed, the religion began to evolve. The initial focus on ritual sacrifice expanded to incorporate deeper philosophical concepts. The Upanishads, which arose out of the later Vedic texts, introduced ideas about the nature of the soul, Atman, the ultimate reality, Brahman, and the cycle of rebirth, samsara. These concepts became the bedrock of later Hindu philosophy, emphasizing self-realization and the pursuit of moksha, liberation from the cycle of life and death. One of the most significant contributions of the Vedic peoples was the development of the Varna system, which would later evolve into the more rigid caste system. Initially, the Varna system was designed to structure society around the roles people played in maintaining the cosmic order. It was an attempt to organize society into functional groups based on occupation and duty, reflecting the Vedic belief that the universe was a harmonious order that needed to be upheld. The four main categories in the Varna system were 1. Brahmins, priests and scholars, responsible for performing rituals and preserving sacred knowledge. 2. Kshatriyas, warriors and rulers, tasked with protecting society and upholding justice. 3. Vaishyas, merchants and farmers, whose role was to provide for society's material needs. 4. Shudras, laborers and servants, performing tasks that supported the other three groups.
Over time, however, this system became more rigid and hereditary, evolving into the caste system that would dominate India for centuries. The Vedic system, initially based on functional roles, transformed into a more stratified social hierarchy, which assigned individuals to specific castes based on birth rather than occupation. Though officially abolished in modern India, the legacy of the caste system still affects social dynamics, especially in rural areas, and its roots can be traced directly back to the Vedic period. While the Vedic texts are primarily religious in nature, they also laid the groundwork for Indian philosophy. The Vedic concept of dharma, the moral law that governs the universe and human society, became a central tenet of later Hindu philosophy. This notion of duty, justice, and righteousness extended beyond religion and influenced the social and ethical framework of Indian culture. The idea of karma, the law of cause and effect, emerged from the Vedic texts, and it became one of the most enduring concepts in Hinduism. Karma holds that every action has consequences, and the quality of one's actions determines their future experiences, both in this life and the next. In addition to karma and dharma, the Vedic period contributed to the language and literature of India. Sanskrit, the language of the Vedas, became the classical language of Indian literature and is still used in many Hindu rituals today. The Vedic hymns and mantras, passed down for generations, continue to be an integral part of Indian spiritual life. The Vedic people's contributions to religion, philosophy, and social structure are woven into the very fabric of modern India. The Vedas continue to be revered as sacred texts, and their ideas about the nature of existence, morality, and the cosmic order form the foundation of Hindu thought. The caste system, despite its controversial and oppressive evolution, still holds cultural significance, particularly in rural areas.
In terms of philosophy, the Vedic teachings have influenced not just Hinduism, but also other Indian religious traditions like Buddhism and Jainism, both of which emerged in the wake of the Vedic period. The philosophical inquiry begun by the Vedic rishis would continue in the Upanishads and later develop into the Bhagavad Gita, the Mahabharata, and the Ramayana, which are the cornerstones of Indian spiritual literature. The cultural legacy of the Vedic period is still visible in modern-day India, from its music, dance, and art to its rituals, festivals, and yoga practices. The Vedic peoples set the stage for an enduring cultural tradition that continues to inspire and shape Indian society today. The Vedic peoples were more than just settlers. They were the creators of a legacy that continues to define India today. Their religious beliefs, social structures, and philosophical teachings laid the groundwork for Indian civilization, influencing everything from politics to spirituality. The transition from pastoralism to agriculture, the birth of the caste system, and the spiritual wisdom contained in the Vedic texts formed the bedrock upon which Indian society was built. Their contributions to religion, culture, and philosophy remain woven into the fabric of modern India, ensuring that the Vedic period is not just a historical chapter, but a living, breathing force that continues to shape the subcontinent. From the sacred mantras to the rituals of worship, the Vedic people's legacy lives on, connecting the past with the present and guiding India into the future. In the vast sweep of Indian history, the transition into the Iron Age around 1200 BCE marks a crucial turning point. This era brought forth new possibilities for agriculture, warfare, and society, fundamentally transforming the Indian subcontinent. The introduction of iron technology not only revolutionized the material culture of the region, but also laid the foundations for the emergence of powerful kingdoms and the birth of the Mahajanapadas, the great kingdoms of ancient India.
The story of the Iron Age is one of technological innovation and social transformation. It was a time when the Vedic people, who had previously relied on bronze tools and a pastoral way of life, began to adopt iron, an element that would reshape their world. But more than just a technological change, the arrival of iron in India was linked to the birth of new political systems and cultural expressions that would shape the future of the subcontinent. The first evidence of ironworking in India dates back to around 1200 BCE, marking the onset of the Iron Age in the subcontinent. Prior to this, Indian societies relied on copper and bronze, metals that were often softer and less durable than iron. Iron, with its superior strength, enabled the Vedic peoples to create tools and weapons that were both more effective and long-lasting. The immediate impact of this development was felt most profoundly in agriculture and warfare. Iron tools, such as the iron plow, dramatically improved farming productivity. The plow, a key innovation, allowed farmers to break through the tough soil of the northern plains and the Deccan Plateau, areas that had previously been difficult to cultivate. This agricultural innovation spurred an increase in food production, enabling larger populations to be sustained. The growth of agricultural surplus contributed directly to the urbanization of India. Villages expanded into towns, and towns became centers of trade, culture, and governance. The introduction of iron axes also allowed for large-scale deforestation and the clearing of land for farming and settlement. With more land under cultivation, agricultural societies were able to flourish, creating a foundation for the eventual rise of urban centers and kingdoms. Iron's role in warfare was equally transformative. The Vedic people, who had previously relied on bronze weapons, now possessed stronger, more durable iron swords, spears, and shields. This newfound military strength allowed them to defend and expand their territories. Iron also facilitated the development of chariotry, the use of horse-drawn chariots in warfare becoming increasingly common. These chariots, combined with iron weaponry, gave the Vedic people a military advantage over neighboring tribes and communities.
As the Iron Age unfolded, the Indian subcontinent witnessed the rise of powerful new kingdoms, the Mahajanapadas, the 16 great kingdoms that emerged across the northern and eastern parts of India. These kingdoms were the direct result of the growing agricultural surplus, increased trade, and the development of military power driven by iron technology. The rise of the Mahajanapadas marked the end of the earlier tribal or Vedic system of governance and the beginning of a more centralized form of monarchy and statecraft. These Mahajanapadas were defined not only by their territorial extent, but by their social organization, trade networks, and military strategies. Some of the most notable among them were Magadha, Kosala, Vatsa, and Kuru, each contributing to the political and cultural landscape of ancient India. Magadha, located along the Ganges River, became one of the most powerful of the Mahajanapadas. Its fertile soil, bolstered by the use of iron tools, allowed for agricultural surplus, which in turn supported a large military and administration. Bimbisara, one of its early kings, expanded the kingdom significantly, setting the stage for the eventual rise of the Maurya Empire. Magadha's power was not just due to its agricultural success, but also its strategic military innovations, bolstered by iron weapons and the development of standing armies. To the west of Magadha, Kosala flourished as an important political and cultural center. It was the birthplace of Lord Rama, the hero of the Ramayana, one of India's two great epics. Kosala's significance was not only its territorial holdings, but its religious importance, as it became a key player in the emerging religious landscape, influencing the development of both Hinduism and the later rise of Buddhism. The shift from nomadic pastoralism to settled agricultural communities profoundly affected Indian politics. As the Mahajanapadas grew, the role of the Raja, chief or king, began to evolve. No longer simply tribal leaders, kings now became the central figures in the governance of large territories, presiding over fortified cities, standing armies, and administrative systems that coordinated taxation, law, and military defense. The Varna system,
which had been a more flexible social framework, began to solidify into the more rigid structure that would later evolve into the caste system. The military, bolstered by iron weaponry, became a central institution of these kingdoms, as expansion through warfare and conquest became the primary means of increasing territorial power. This new political landscape also saw the establishment of city-states and kingdoms with increasingly complex political structures, setting the stage for the Mauryan Empire and the Gupta Empire.
The arrival of the Iron Age in India around 1200 BCE ushered in a new political, social, and cultural era. The transformative impact of iron tools on agriculture, warfare, and trade laid the foundation for the rise of the Mahajanapadas, the powerful kingdoms that defined the landscape of ancient India. These kingdoms, shaped by their military strength, agricultural surplus, and political organization, marked the end of the tribal governance system and the beginning of monarchical rule. The Iron Age was not just a technological revolution, but a catalyst for the growth of urban centers, the development of complex social structures, and the eventual rise of Indian empires that would shape the future of the subcontinent. The legacy of the Iron Age and the Mahajanapadas can still be seen in the modern political and cultural structures of India. Their innovations in political organization, agriculture, and military strategy provided the building blocks for one of the world's most enduring civilizations, whose influence continues to be felt today. The Mauryan Empire stands as one of the most transformative periods in Indian history, not only for its territorial expansion, but for its enduring legacy in political administration, military innovation, and cultural development. The empire's rise, beginning with Chandragupta Maurya and flourishing under Ashoka the Great, marks a period of consolidation and cultural transformation that laid the foundation for India's future political, social, and spiritual identity. The Mauryan Empire was born out of chaos and fragmentation. India, at the time of Chandragupta Maurya's rise, was a region divided into multiple smaller kingdoms and republics, with no central authority strong enough to unite the subcontinent. Chandragupta, born in a humble family, emerged as a military and political leader who, under the mentorship of Chanakya, a brilliant strategist and teacher, sought to establish a unified empire. Chandragupta's military campaigns against the Nanda dynasty of Magadha and the Greek satraps left by Alexander the Great in the northwest played a pivotal role in expanding the early Mauryan territories. His victory over the Greek satraps in the northwest allowed the Mauryas to secure control over the strategically important regions of Gandhara and Punjab, opening up trade routes with the west and establishing a power base in northern India. Chandragupta's initial military successes were complemented by his strategic political alliances, particularly with the Seleucid Empire following the conquest of Alexander's successors.
His reign marked the foundation of the Mauryan Empire's centralized bureaucracy, which would come to characterize its governance. Chandragupta, aided by Chanakya's Arthashastra, implemented an efficient administrative system, with a centralized government, provincial governors, and a powerful military apparatus. The capital city of Pataliputra, modern-day Patna, became the empire's political and administrative hub, thriving in commerce, culture, and governance. After Chandragupta's abdication and subsequent conversion to Jainism, his son Bindusara ascended the throne. While Bindusara's reign is often overshadowed by the monumental achievements of Ashoka, he played a significant role in consolidating Mauryan control over the Deccan Plateau and expanding the empire's influence across southern India. Bindusara's expansion through military conquest was crucial in laying the groundwork for Ashoka's later greatness. Bindusara's reign, however, was relatively short and is often described as a period of relative stability, as the empire focused more on strengthening its territorial holdings than on cultural or spiritual developments. It was under his son, Ashoka, that the Mauryan Empire would reach the height of its power, both militarily and culturally. Ashoka the Great, the third ruler of the Mauryan Empire, is perhaps the most famous and celebrated of all Indian emperors. His reign from 268 BCE to 232 BCE represents a monumental period of political consolidation, cultural growth, and spiritual transformation. Ashoka's early years were marked by a relentless pursuit of military conquest and territorial expansion. His campaign against the Kalinga kingdom in 261 BCE is particularly notable for its scale and brutality. It was during the Kalinga War that Ashoka experienced a transformation that would define his legacy. The sheer devastation of the war, the massive loss of life, and the human suffering it caused left Ashoka deeply disturbed. Overcome with remorse, Ashoka made a personal and public commitment to nonviolence, ahimsa, and compassion. This decision led to his conversion to Buddhism, a spiritual tradition that emphasized peace, tolerance, and the welfare of all beings.
Ashoka's reign is perhaps most enduringly marked by his edicts, inscriptions carved on stone pillars, rocks, and cave walls scattered across India and beyond. These edicts, written in Prakrit and Aramaic, provide a unique glimpse into Ashoka's vision for governance and his moral philosophy. The edicts focus on a variety of themes: the promotion of moral conduct, the welfare of the people, and religious tolerance. Ashoka's moral edicts emphasize the importance of nonviolence and the promotion of good governance. In these inscriptions, Ashoka called for the fair treatment of animals, the construction of wells and rest houses for travelers, and the establishment of medical facilities. His commitment to peaceful coexistence extended beyond his own kingdom, as he sent missionaries to spread Buddhism to regions as far as Sri Lanka, Southeast Asia, and even parts of the Mediterranean. Ashoka's edicts are also remarkable for their religious tolerance. Although Ashoka was a devout Buddhist, he encouraged respect for all religions, emphasizing that all paths could lead to moral righteousness. He called for the avoidance of sectarianism and the importance of understanding and kindness between different religious communities. Ashoka's reign was not only about military expansion and administrative reforms, but also about laying the foundations for a more compassionate and inclusive society. His focus on human welfare, coupled with his deep commitment to Buddhism, made him one of the most enlightened rulers in history. The Mauryan Empire under Ashoka reached its zenith, covering much of the Indian subcontinent, from the Himalayas to the Deccan Plateau, and from the Bay of Bengal to the Arabian Sea. Yet Ashoka's true greatness lies not in his territorial conquests, but in his moral and philosophical transformation. He embodied the idea that a ruler's primary duty is to ensure the welfare of the people, guiding his empire with wisdom, compassion, and spiritual insight. Despite Ashoka's remarkable leadership, the Mauryan Empire began to decline after his death. Internal strife, weakened central control, and external invasions slowly eroded the empire's power. The Mauryas eventually collapsed in 185 BCE, with the last Mauryan ruler, Brihadratha, assassinated by his general Pushyamitra Shunga, who founded the Shunga dynasty.
However, Ashoka's legacy endured long after the fall of the Mauryan Empire. His edicts, his promotion of Buddhism, and his commitment to moral governance continued to influence subsequent rulers and the development of Indian culture for centuries. The Mauryan Empire, under Chandragupta Maurya and Ashoka, was one of the most important and transformative periods in Indian history. From its military foundations to its cultural and spiritual evolution, the empire set the stage for much of India's future political and religious development. Ashoka's conversion to Buddhism, his edicts of peace, and his promotion of welfare were groundbreaking not just for his time, but continue to resonate in modern discussions on governance, ethics, and nonviolence. In the Mauryan Empire, we find the first examples of a unified India, governed by an enlightened ruler whose legacy transcended borders and faiths. Ashoka's vision of a compassionate, tolerant, and just society remains an enduring inspiration for leaders and citizens around the world. His story, from the conqueror of Kalinga to the propagator of peace, shows the power of personal transformation and moral leadership, a lesson that echoes through history. The Gupta Empire, stretching from around 320 CE to 550 CE, stands as one of the most remarkable periods in Indian history, often referred to as the Golden Age. It was an era marked by unprecedented achievements in science, mathematics, literature, philosophy, and art, creating a cultural renaissance that shaped the trajectory of Indian civilization and left an enduring legacy for the world. The Gupta dynasty, with rulers like Chandragupta I, Samudragupta, and Chandragupta II, not only unified vast swaths of the subcontinent, but also laid the intellectual and cultural foundations that would influence generations to come. Before the Gupta dynasty ascended to power, India was a mosaic of small kingdoms and territories, each with its own culture and governance. The Gupta Empire arose in the north of India when Chandragupta I established control over a large region around Magadha, modern-day Bihar. His son, Samudragupta, further expanded the empire, solidifying its position as a powerful political entity. Chandragupta II, also known as Vikramaditya, is often credited with bringing the empire to its peak, both territorially and culturally. The Gupta rulers established a centralized political system with an efficient bureaucracy that facilitated trade, maintained law and order, and supported cultural patronage. The capital city of Pataliputra, modern-day Patna, became a hub of administration, commerce, and intellectual activity. The stability and prosperity of the Gupta Empire allowed it to foster a thriving cultural environment. One of the most significant legacies of the Gupta Empire is its contributions to the fields of science and mathematics. During this period, Aryabhata, a brilliant mathematician and astronomer, revolutionized the understanding of the cosmos and mathematics. Aryabhata's seminal work, the Aryabhatiya, written in 499 CE, presented groundbreaking theories that would influence both Indian and global scientific thought for centuries. Aryabhata's most famous contribution was his heliocentric theory, which proposed that the Earth rotates on its axis and that this rotation is the cause of day and night. This was a remarkable leap in understanding, as it contradicted the prevailing belief that the Earth was the center of the universe. His model of the cosmos, while different from modern understandings, demonstrated a deep knowledge of the stars, planets, and the structure of the universe. In addition to his work on astronomy, Aryabhata made significant contributions to mathematics. He is credited with formulating the concept of zero as a placeholder in numerical systems, which was a precursor to the modern decimal system. Aryabhata also calculated the approximate value of pi, to be 3.1416, an impressive approximation given the tools of his time. His work on trigonometry and the calculation of sine values also laid the foundation for later developments in mathematics, not only in India, but also in Islamic and European mathematics. While the Gupta Empire is most celebrated for its intellectual achievements, it also witnessed an unprecedented flourishing of literature, philosophy, and the arts. Kalidasa, often considered the greatest of Sanskrit dramatists, produced works of unparalleled beauty and emotional depth. His famous play, Shakuntala,
and his epic poem Raghuvamsa are masterpieces of Indian literature, embodying themes of love, heroism, and the complexities of human relationships. Kalidas's works continue to be performed and studied to this day, highlighting the enduring cultural significance of Gupta-era literature. In addition to literary masterpieces, the Gupta Empire saw a rise in the visual arts, including sculpture, painting, and architecture. The period is known for the creation of stunning temple art, with intricately carved statues of deities, as well as the Ajanta and Ellora caves, which feature vibrant frescoes and intricate sculptures that provide insight into religious and cultural life.
Perhaps one of the greatest contributions of the Gupta Empire to human history was the establishment of Nalanda University, a world-renowned center of learning that attracted scholars from across India and beyond. Founded in the 5th century CE during the reign of Chandragupta II, Nalanda became a hub for the study of Buddhism, philosophy, medicine, astronomy, mathematics, and many other disciplines. Nalanda was not just a university in the traditional sense, it was a vibrant intellectual community. The Buddhist scholar Huanzang, who traveled to India from China, studied at Nalanda and later wrote about the profound impact it had on his own intellectual development. The university boasted a library that housed hundreds of thousands of manuscripts, covering every conceivable field of study. This unparalleled wealth of knowledge attracted scholars and students from as far as Southeast Asia and Central Asia, making Nalanda a true center of global learning. The Gupta period also saw the flourishing of Hinduism as the dominant religion in India, though Buddhism continued to thrive, especially in regions like Magadha. The Gupta emperors were patrons of both Hinduism and Buddhism, building temples and supporting scholars. The period saw the consolidation of Hindu beliefs, the development of Brahmanical rituals, and the creation of important texts like the Puranas, which offered myths, genealogies, and teachings that formed the backbone of Hindu tradition. The Gupta Empire remains one of the most celebrated periods in Indian history. Its contributions to science, mathematics, literature, and education helped shape not only the future of India, but also left an enduring legacy on the world. Figures like Aryabhata revolutionized astronomy and mathematics, while Kalidasa enriched the literary world with timeless works. Nalanda University, a beacon of learning and intellectual exchange, became a center of Buddhist and secular scholarship, laying the foundation for centuries of academic inquiry. The Gupta Empire's achievements were not confined to intellectual growth, but extended to art, architecture, and philosophy, marking it as a time of profound cultural prosperity. Though the empire eventually declined in the 6th century CE, the Gupta Golden Age remains a pivotal chapter in India's history, shaping the nation's intellectual, cultural, and spiritual life for generations.
With the collapse of the Gupta Empire in the late 6th century CE, India entered a time of political fragmentation and decentralization. What had once been a unified empire now became a collection of smaller kingdoms, each vying for power, wealth, and influence. This period marked the rise of several regional kingdoms, including the Vakatakas, Pallavas, and Rajputs, each contributing significantly to India's cultural, military, and political history. While these kingdoms were often in conflict with one another, they also played vital roles in preserving India's rich traditions and laying the foundations for future empires. The Vakataka dynasty, which ruled central India, stands as one of the first to emerge following the Gupta decline. The dynasty rose in the Deccan Plateau, a region that became crucial in connecting the north and south of India. The Vakatakas were known for their ability to balance military conquest with cultural patronage. Their greatest achievements lay in their role as patrons of both Hinduism and Buddhism, facilitating the spread of these religions across central India. Politically, the Vakatakas employed a feudal system, with regional governors managing the various territories within the empire.
This decentralization allowed for local autonomy, which contributed to both the strength and weakness of their rule. On the one hand, local leaders had the power to defend their territories, but on the other hand, this system made it difficult for the central monarchy to maintain consistent control. Their military prowess was tested during their conflicts with neighboring powers like the Chalukyas and Guptas. Despite these challenges, the Vakatakas managed to consolidate their rule through alliances, marriage, and strategic warfare. Under the reign of King Narendra Sena, the Vakatakas expanded their territory and influence, positioning themselves as one of the most important forces in the Deccan. The Vakatakas' cultural contributions were equally significant. They were responsible for sponsoring the Ajanta caves, one of the most notable examples of ancient Indian art and Buddhist architecture. The murals and sculptures in the caves reflect the cultural and religious ethos of the time, and remain some of the best preserved representations of ancient Indian Buddhist art.
Meanwhile, to the south, the Pallavas were laying the foundations of a cultural and architectural renaissance that would dominate southern India for centuries. The Pallavas, ruling from the 4th to the 9th century CE, played a pivotal role in preserving and spreading Hinduism in southern India while also fostering the development of Buddhism. Under rulers like Mahendravarman I and Narasimhavarman I, the Pallavas expanded their empire through military conquest, capturing territories in the Deccan and Tamil regions. The Pallava army was renowned for its chariotry and war elephants, allowing them to assert dominance over rival states like the Chalukyas and the Vakatakas. Despite constant conflicts with these neighboring powers, the Pallavas managed to maintain their political dominance, especially in the Tamil-speaking regions. Culturally, the Pallavas made some of their most enduring contributions in the field of temple architecture. The rock-cut temples of Mahabalipuram, including the Shore Temple, stand as testament to their architectural genius. These structures, carved into the rock faces, were not just places of worship, but also symbols of Pallava power and devotion. The Pallavas' patronage of Buddhist and Hindu art made Mahabalipuram one of the most important cultural centers of the period. The Pallava dynasty also helped shape the religious landscape of Southeast Asia. Their influence can be seen in the temples of Cambodia and Vietnam, where Pallava-inspired art and architecture flourished. This cross-cultural exchange solidified the Pallavas' legacy as the cultural stewards of southern India. In the northern regions, the Rajputs began to emerge as the dominant power following the decline of the Gupta Empire. The Rajputs were a warrior class whose origin is debated, but by the 6th century CE, they had established themselves as the ruling elite in much of Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, and Gujarat.
Politically, the Rajputs were often fragmented into several smaller kingdoms, each ruled by a local chieftain or ruler. These chieftains formed alliances through marriage and military service, often coming together in times of external threats or invasions. The Rajput military system was founded on a strong code of honor, with kings and warriors expected to display bravery and loyalty. Rajput warriors were well known for their courage in battle, and the Rajput kingdom was often at war with other regional powers or facing foreign invasions from Central Asia. The Rajputs also developed a rich cultural and religious tradition. While many Rajput rulers followed Hinduism, the Rajput dynasties also promoted Buddhism and Jainism, with rulers like Raja Bhoj of Madhya Pradesh encouraging the construction of temples and Jain monuments. The Rajput kingdom was a patron of arts, particularly literature, music, and painting. Rajput palaces and fortresses, such as Chittorgarh Fort, stand as enduring symbols of their military valor and artistic sophistication. The kingdoms that emerged after the fall of the Gupta Empire were predominantly feudal, with power being divided among local rulers. Each region had its own challenges, from managing internal strife to defending against external invaders. Military conflicts, both internal and external, played a significant role in shaping the political dynamics of this period. these kingdoms were constantly engaged in battles over land, resources, and strategic control. Despite their fragmented political systems, these kingdoms contributed to the preservation of India's cultural heritage. The spread of Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism, as well as the development of art and literature during this period, is a testament to the resilience and adaptability of India's regional powers. The period following the Gupta Empire's decline was marked by political fragmentation, yet it also witnessed the emergence of powerful regional kingdoms that each contributed to India's cultural and military history. The Vakatakas, Pallavas, and Rajputs rose from the ashes of a fractured subcontinent, each shaping the political landscape and cultural fabric of India. While India may have been politically divided, it remained intellectually and artistically vibrant, with these regional powers ensuring that India's cultural heritage would endure through the centuries. These regional kingdoms, despite their conflicts, laid the foundation for the future Indian empires, leaving behind legacies of architectural brilliance, military valor, and cultural dynamism that continue to resonate today. Their stories of resilience, transformation, and cultural flourishing are integral chapters in India's rich history. The history of India, a land known for its diverse cultures and rich traditions, took a monumental turn with the arrival of Islam. The first Muslim incursions into the Indian subcontinent did not occur in a vacuum, but were part of a broader wave of religious and cultural exchange that was unfolding across much of Asia. Beginning with the early Arab invasions in the 8th century, the influence of Islam would grow steadily over the following centuries, culminating in the rise of the Delhi Sultanate and the establishment of Muslim rule across large parts of India.
The initial incursions were relatively limited, primarily targeting the northwestern regions of India. However, over time, these invasions would give rise to some of the most influential Muslim dynasties in India's history, forever altering its political, cultural, and social landscape. The history of Islam's spread into India is thus marked by a blend of force and cultural integration, a combination that laid the groundwork for centuries of Muslim influence in the subcontinent. The first significant Muslim incursion into India began in 711 CE, when Muhammad bin Qasim, under the Umayyad Caliphate, led an army across the Indus River into Sindh, modern-day Pakistan. Muhammad bin Qasim's victory at the Battle of Auror paved the way for Muslim rule in the region. However, his conquest was far from sweeping. Sindh remained a contested territory, and the impact of Arab rule was primarily confined to the urban centers and coastal areas. The Sindh region became a melting pot of cultures, with Muslim merchants interacting with local Hindu, Buddhist, and Jain populations. This led to the gradual adoption of Islamic ideas by local elites, though the vast majority of the population continued practicing their traditional religions. This early period saw Islam being introduced in the Northwest as more of an elite religion, with Islamic law governing trade and local governance in urban areas rather than imposing a sweeping cultural transformation across the region. This initial period of Arab rule also laid the foundation for future cultural exchanges between the Indian subcontinent and the wider Muslim world, particularly with regions like Central Asia and Persia. Muslim traders brought goods, as well as Islamic religious practices, which would play a pivotal role in the long-term spread of Islam.
It was not until the 12th century that the real Islamic presence in India began to solidify. The Delhi Sultanate was established in 1206 CE by Qutb-ud-Din Aibak, a former slave of the Ghurid dynasty. Aibak's reign marked the start of more than 3 centuries of Muslim rule in India, which would last until the Mughal Empire took power in the 16th century. Under the Delhi Sultanate, the political landscape of northern India changed dramatically. Sultans like Qutb-ud-Din Aibak, Iltutmish, and Ala-ud-Din Khilji not only expanded the territorial boundaries of Muslim rule through military conquest, but also established Islamic governance systems, influenced by the Persian and Central Asian traditions. Sharia law began to influence legal systems in the Sultanate, particularly in urban centers.
The early Delhi Sultanate rulers also introduced significant administrative reforms, including a more centralized bureaucratic system and a taxation structure that reflected the Islamic principles of governance. This transformation was especially visible in the military system, which relied heavily on Turkic slave soldiers, the Mamluks, who played a pivotal role in the success of the Sultanate. However, the relationship between the Muslim rulers and the native Indian population was far from harmonious. The Delhi Sultanate was often in conflict with the local Hindu and Rajput rulers, resulting in frequent military campaigns to assert dominance. The Sultanate rulers sought to solidify their power not only through military conquest, but also by constructing monumental mosques and minarets, such as the Qutub Minar in Delhi, which became symbols of their Islamic authority. Islam's expansion in India was not solely through the sword. It also spread through peaceful means, particularly trade and missionary activity. Muslim merchants who came to India's coasts, particularly in regions like Kerala and Gujarat, played a significant role in spreading Islam. Through their commercial networks, they established thriving Muslim communities that acted as cultural and religious bridges between the Indian subcontinent and the Middle East.
Sufi missionaries in particular played a crucial role in the spread of Islam across India. They were known for their tolerance, their focus on spiritual experience, and their ability to incorporate local traditions into their practices. Sufism, with its emphasis on love and devotion, resonated deeply with the Indian populace, particularly in rural areas where it was often seen as a more accessible form of Islam. The Sufi saints, like Khwaja Moinuddin Chishti in Ajmer, became spiritual leaders who attracted large followings, regardless of caste or religion. The Sufi way of preaching and community building helped Islam spread across India's villages and towns. The introduction of Islam to India also marked the beginning of a profound cultural synthesis. While the early Muslim rulers imposed Islamic laws and institutions, their rule also led to a fusion of Indian and Islamic practices. This fusion produced a distinct Indo-Islamic culture that would become a hallmark of Indian civilization in the centuries to come. Architecturally, the Delhi Sultanate saw the emergence of the Indo-Islamic style, blending Islamic, Persian, and Hindu architectural elements. This can be seen in the Qutub Minar, the Alai Darwaza, and the Jama Masjid in Delhi, where Islamic calligraphy and Hindu motifs coexisted, reflecting a society that, while dominated by Islamic rule, was deeply influenced by its Indian heritage. Literature also saw a blending of traditions. The Urdu language, born out of the interaction between Persian and Indian vernaculars, became the medium for much of the Indo-Islamic poetry. Sufi poets like Rumi wrote in Persian, while Indian Muslim poets began using Urdu to express religious devotion and love. In terms of religion, Islamic influence was evident in the growth of Islamic schools, the construction of mosques, and the introduction of Islamic festivals like Eid. Yet, these practices often mingled with Hindu traditions, creating a new hybrid religious landscape. The growing Bhakti movement in Hinduism, which emphasized personal devotion to the divine, also found common ground with Sufi mysticism, leading to an era of religious fusion.
The first Muslim invasions and the subsequent establishment of the Delhi Sultanate marked the beginning of a new chapter in Indian history. From the early Arab incursions to the Delhi Sultanate's consolidation of power, the rise of Islam in India was a multifaceted process that involved both military conquest and peaceful integration. Over the centuries, Islam became deeply embedded in India's political, cultural, and social fabric, resulting in the creation of a unique Indo-Islamic civilization that would shape India's future for centuries to come. These early incursions of Islam not only brought with them new political systems, but also sparked the cultural exchanges that produced a unique hybrid culture. The Sufi mystics, merchants, and rulers helped forge a society in which Hinduism and Islam coexisted,
sometimes in tension, but also in syncretism. The influence of Islam on Indian architecture, language, and religion remains evident today in the mosques of Delhi, the Urdu language of North India, and the cultural legacy of the Mughal Empire that followed. The Delhi Sultanate, 1206 to 1526, represents one of the most significant chapters in the history of Indian Islam. As the first Muslim empire in India, it reshaped the subcontinent's political, cultural, and social structures in profound ways. Despite its fragmented nature, marked by internal dissension and external pressures, the Sultanate's rulers managed to maintain power through a combination of military might, administrative innovations, and cultural synthesis. The legacy of this era has left a lasting imprint on Indian civilization, seen in everything from architecture and language to religion and social order. The formation of the Delhi Sultanate, consolidation of power. The Delhi Sultanate was born out of the Ghurid invasions, which culminated in the capture of Delhi by Qutb-ud-Din Aibak in 1206 CE. Aibak, a former slave who rose through the ranks of the Ghurid army, established the Mamluk dynasty and laid the foundation for a Muslim empire in northern India. Aibak's consolidation of power, however, was not a smooth process. The region was filled with competing local kingdoms, including Rajput and Hindu rulers, all of whom sought to maintain their autonomy in the face of Muslim encroachment. However, Iltutmish, Aibak's successor, succeeded in establishing the Delhi Sultanate as a stable and powerful political entity. Iltutmish faced significant challenges as he sought to consolidate Muslim rule in a diverse and often hostile land. The central Indian plains were still dominated by Rajput dynasties, and many of his military campaigns were aimed at suppressing local resistance. However, Iltutmish's successful expansion of the empire and establishment of a strong administrative framework ensured that the Sultanate could sustain its power for centuries.
Iltutmish's administrative reforms helped integrate the vast and culturally diverse regions under his control. He established a centralized bureaucracy, appointed loyal governors to control the provinces, and implemented a tax system that supported the military and royal court. His efforts not only ensured political stability, but also promoted Islamic principles in governance, helping to shape the future direction of the Sultanate. The Delhi Sultanate reached the height of its military power and territorial expansion during the reign of Alauddin Khilji, 1296 to 1316. Khilji's reign was marked by his ambitious military campaigns aimed at consolidating Muslim rule across northern India and beyond. His successful campaigns against the Rajput states, such as his siege of Chittorgarh and his conquests in Madhya Pradesh and South India, expanded the Sultanate's borders to their greatest extent. Alauddin's military reforms were instrumental in maintaining a powerful and efficient army. He created a standing army, ensured the regular payment of troops, and instituted rigorous recruitment procedures. He also introduced market reforms, regulating prices to ensure stability within the empire. His reign is also noted for his attempts to suppress the elite nobility and increase central control, reflecting his determination to ensure that power remained in the hands of the Sultan. However, Alauddin's reign was not without its drawbacks. His policies, including the imposition of heavy taxes on agricultural produce, led to discontent among the peasants. Additionally, his authoritarian style and the brutal punishments he meted out to his subjects fostered widespread resentment. Still, Alauddin's architectural legacy, including the construction of Alai Darwaza and the Qutub Minar, demonstrates his ambition to leave a lasting mark on Delhi. No ruler in the Delhi Sultanate was as controversial as Muhammad bin Tughlaq, 1325 to 1351. Tughlaq, whose reign was marked by both visionary reforms and disastrous failures, remains one of the most enigmatic figures in Indian history. His ambitious plans, including the relocation of the capital from Delhi to Daulatabad in the Deccan, were meant to consolidate Muslim rule over the southern regions of India. However, this decision proved to be a logistical nightmare, as the population was forced to travel long distances, leading to widespread discontent and resistance.
Tughlaq's economic reforms, particularly his introduction of token currency, also failed miserably.
The lack of trust in the new currency system led to widespread counterfeiting, causing hyperinflation and economic collapse. Despite these failures, Tughlaq did expand the empire's territories, particularly in the south, where his military campaigns led to the temporary annexation of several key kingdoms. Tughlaq's rule exemplified the difficulties of governing such a vast and diverse empire. While his reforms were ambitious, they often lacked proper execution and were met with resistance from both the military and local populations. His reign stands as a reminder of the challenges faced by rulers attempting to govern an empire as expansive and varied as the Delhi Sultanate. Despite the political instability and internal struggles, the Delhi Sultanate had a profound cultural and social impact on India. The Sultanate was instrumental in the spread of Islam throughout northern India, but it also facilitated the blending of cultures. This synthesis of Indian and Islamic traditions led to the rise of Indo-Islamic culture, which manifested in architecture, literature, and religion. Under the Sultanate, Islamic architecture flourished, as evidenced by the Qutb Minar, the Alai Darwaza, and the Jama Masjid. The Delhi Sultanate also saw the growth of Urdu, a language that emerged as a blend of Persian and local vernaculars. The Sufi mystics of the period helped create a more inclusive society, one that allowed for greater religious syncretism and tolerance, particularly in rural areas. The social impact of Muslim rule was mixed, as it brought new systems of governance, but also taxation policies that heavily burdened the peasantry. However, the rise of a Muslim elite, particularly in the noble classes and military, created new opportunities for Indian Muslims, who would go on to play key roles in future Mughal and Maratha dynasties.
The Delhi Sultanate was a period of immense change and transformation for the Indian subcontinent. Despite the internal turmoil and external threats faced by the Sultanate, its rulers played a crucial role in shaping India's political structure, cultural identity, and religious landscape. From the consolidation of power under Iltutmish to the military triumphs of Alauddin Khilji and the visionary yet flawed reign of Muhammad bin Tughlaq, the Sultanate was a defining force in Indian history. Its legacy, characterized by the creation of Indo-Islamic culture, the spread of Islam, and the growth of architectural masterpieces, continues to resonate in India's cultural heritage. The Delhi Sultanate set the stage for the rise of the Mughal Empire and left an indelible mark on the history of the Indian subcontinent. The rise of the Marathas under Shivaji Maharaj is one of the most defining chapters in India's medieval history. Emerging from the rugged terrains of the Western Ghats, the Marathas challenged the Mughal Empire, then the largest power in India, with strategies that were both military and political, but also deeply cultural. Their rise to prominence marked a transition from the dominance of central power in Delhi to the birth of regional powers that would shape the subcontinent for centuries. Shivaji Maharaj, born in 1630 to Shahaji Bhosle, a Maratha general under the Deccan Sultanates, and Jijabai, was destined to carve his name in history. His early exposure to both the military and administrative worlds gave him the tools he would need to forge an empire that would resist the overwhelming power of the Mughals. But Shivaji's greatness did not just lie in his military tactics. It was his ability to unite people from various communities, his diplomatic acumen, and his vision for a Maratha state that allowed him to build a powerful empire from scratch. Shivaji's rise began in the early 1650s when at a young age he began to assert control over the Deccan Plateau, starting with the capture of Torna Fort. Unlike other regional leaders, Shivaji was not content with merely holding territory. He sought to create a state that could stand on its own against the looming presence of the Mughal Empire, which had by then come to dominate much of India.
His campaigns in the Deccan were marked by innovative tactics, such as his use of light cavalry, speed, and surprise attacks. But Shivaji's military strategy wasn't solely based on brute force. His expertise lay in his ability to capitalize on the region's geography, using the Western Ghats to conduct guerrilla warfare that took full advantage of the terrain and local support. His forces, small yet agile, could strike swiftly at the Mughal supply lines and then retreat into the hills to regroup, making it nearly impossible for the Mughal forces to retaliate effectively. However, the Marathas' military success was not just about tactics. Shivaji understood that to challenge the Mughals, he would need to create a sustained political infrastructure. By establishing a centralized administration, complete with a revenue system and a navy, Shivaji laid the groundwork for an empire that could stand independently. His success in securing the coastal territories, particularly around Raigad, allowed him to establish a navy capable of defending the Konkan coast against both Portuguese and Mughal naval presence. The Mughal Empire, under Aurangzeb, was not a passive spectator to the rise of Shivaji. Aurangzeb's campaign to annex the Deccan and bring the southern kingdoms under Mughal control brought him into direct conflict with the Marathas. Unlike other Mughal emperors, Aurangzeb was intent on stamping out any regional power that threatened Mughal authority, and he viewed Shivaji as a significant obstacle to his plans. The conflict between the Mughals and the Marathas was not just a series of military engagements, it was a clash of ideologies and methods. While the Mughals relied on large, well-organized armies and conventional warfare, the Marathas, under Shivaji, emphasized mobility and guerrilla tactics. The Marathas targeted Mughal supply lines, fortresses, and weak points, using their knowledge of the local terrain to mount lightning-fast raids before melting back into the hills.
One of the most iconic moments of this conflict came in 1666, when Shivaji was summoned to the Mughal court in Agra. There, he was kept under house arrest by Aurangzeb. But in a move that would become legendary, Shivaji escaped disguised as a common man, returning to the Deccan and solidifying his position as a ruler who would never bow to Mughal authority. Despite several Mughal campaigns to quell the Maratha uprising, including multiple attempts to capture Raigad and subdue Shivaji, the Mughals were often frustrated by the Marathas' tactical mastery and resilient spirit. By the time of Shivaji's death in 1680, the Marathas were well on their way to becoming one of the most formidable regional powers in India. After Shivaji's death, his successors, notably his son Sambhaji and his brother Rajaram, continued the struggle against Mughal encroachment. Sambhaji led the Marathas during a turbulent time, facing both Mughal military might and internal dissent. His capture and execution by the Mughals in 1689 marked a low point for the Marathas, but it also spurred greater resistance. The real transformation came with Bajirao I, 1720 to 1740, who took the mantle of leadership and expanded the Maratha Empire to new heights. Under Bajirao I, the Marathas pushed deep into northern India, capturing territories as far as Delhi and Punjab, challenging the Mughals at their heart. The Marathas, though unable to permanently conquer Delhi, had become the dominant force in India, shifting the balance of power away from the Mughals and laying the foundation for future regional power struggles. Shivaji's legacy went far beyond his military conquests. As a statesman, he recognized that a strong administration was as important as a capable army. He established a system of revenue collection, appointed officials who were loyal to him, and created a naval force to safeguard the Konkan coast. These measures allowed him to build a state that was independent of Mughal control, both militarily and administratively.
Shivaji's role as a cultural leader was also significant. His promotion of Hindu pride and the revival of Hindu temples, alongside his policy of religious tolerance, helped create a Maratha identity that transcended caste and creed. He encouraged the participation of non-Hindu communities in his government, laying the groundwork for a pluralistic Maratha society. The rise of the Marathas under Shivaji Maharaj marked a turning point in Indian history. Their successful resistance against the Mughal Empire redefined the political and cultural landscape of India, creating a legacy that would echo through the centuries. Through his guerrilla tactics, political acumen, and naval power, Shivaji Maharaj not only founded an empire, but also sowed the seeds for regional resistance movements that would continue to shape India's future. The Maratha Confederacy, which emerged after Shivaji's death, would continue to challenge Mughal power and eventually set the stage for the rise of the British in India. The Marathas were more than just a military force. They were the embodiment of India's resilience and its ability to adapt and evolve in the face of overwhelming external forces. Shivaji's vision for a free, self-sustained and tolerant India provided the framework for an empire that would influence generations of Indians, making the Marathas a symbol of pride, resistance and unity in the subcontinent's complex history.
The history of the Mughal Empire is a tapestry woven from centuries of ambition, military brilliance, and the slow but steady consolidation of power in a land marked by vast diversity and political fragmentation. Founded by Babur, a descendant of the great conquerors Timur and Genghis Khan, the Mughal Empire began its remarkable rise with a pivotal moment, the Battle of Panipat in 1526. Babur's victory over the Sultan of Delhi, Ibrahim Lodi, established the Mughal presence in India, initiating a period of expansion that would transform the Indian subcontinent into one of the richest and most culturally diverse empires in history. Babur's path to India began far from the plains of northern India. Born in 1483 in the Fergana Valley, modern-day Uzbekistan, Babur was a descendant of two of history's most famous conquerors, Timur, the Turkic ruler of Central Asia, and Genghis Khan, the Mongol emperor. As a young boy, Babur inherited the kingdom of Fergana, but his early years were marred by political instability and the constant threat of invasions from rival kingdoms. Babur's ambition, however, was far greater than his small kingdom could contain. In 1526, after a series of military setbacks and battles to reclaim lost territories, Babur turned his attention to India, which was experiencing its own fragmentation with the fall of the Delhi Sultanate and the rise of regional powers. With his forces, which included a mix of Central Asian cavalry and gunpowder technology, Babur confronted the forces of Ibrahim Lodi in the First Battle of Panipat. Despite being outnumbered, Babur's use of gunpowder cannons, a novel weapon at the time, proved decisive. The battle marked the beginning of the Mughal Empire in India, where Babur's victory gave him control over Delhi and its surrounding regions.
Babur's success in establishing his rule, however, was far from guaranteed. His position was precarious, as regional powers in the Deccan Plateau and Rajputana continued to resist his rule. Nevertheless, Babur's triumph at Panipat laid the foundation for his descendants to build one of the most enduring empires in Indian history. The real architect of the Mughal Empire's greatness was Akbar, Babur's grandson, who ascended the throne in 1556 after the untimely death of his father, Humayun. At just 13 years old, Akbar was thrust into a turbulent situation. The empire was still in its infancy, and much of northern India was either in the hands of Hindu Rajputs or divided among smaller regional powers. The Afghan rulers in the north also posed a significant threat. However, Akbar's rise would be marked by military genius, administrative acumen, and an uncanny ability to unite diverse peoples. His early military campaigns, notably against the Afghans and Rajput kingdoms, were decisive in consolidating Mughal control over the northern subcontinent. Akbar's military prowess, combined with his strong leadership, helped establish the Mughal Empire's dominance in India. Akbar's reign was characterized by a series of brilliant military campaigns. His battles with the Rajputs in Rajasthan, including the famous siege of Chittorgarh, 1567, were pivotal in incorporating Rajputana into the Mughal fold. Akbar's ability to negotiate with Rajput rulers, offering them positions in his imperial court, helped ease the integration of these powerful Hindu kingdoms into the Mughal Empire. Through marriage alliances, military victories, and diplomacy, Akbar succeeded in expanding Mughal territories from the Punjab in the north to Gujarat in the west and Bengal in the east. Not only did Akbar expand the Mughal Empire's territorial limits, but he also ensured that it became a military and economic powerhouse. His expansion was not just about conquest, but about integration, as he adapted the empire's military systems to maintain control over diverse regions. Akbar's innovative use of cavalry and his creation of a professional army based on the Mansabdari system were instrumental in securing the empire's power for the long term.
One of Akbar's most remarkable contributions to Indian history was his policy of religious tolerance. At a time when religious divisions ran deep in India, Akbar sought to create an empire where Hindus, Muslims, and people of all faiths could coexist peacefully. Akbar's Sul-e-Kul policy, meaning peace with all, aimed to unite the diverse people of the empire through respect and dialogue. Akbar abolished the jizya tax that had been levied on non-Muslims and promoted Hindus into significant positions of power within the administration. Rajput princes were appointed as governors, and many served as military commanders. Akbar also welcomed scholars from various religious traditions to his court, creating a rich environment for intellectual exchange. Akbar's vision extended beyond politics. He was deeply interested in the artistic and cultural flourishing of his empire. He patronized art, literature, and architecture, commissioning works that reflected the fusion of Persian and Indian styles. His reign saw the development of the Mughal architectural style, with monumental buildings such as the Fatehpur Sikri and the Agra Fort becoming symbols of Mughal grandeur. Akbar's administrative reforms were equally groundbreaking. He implemented a system known as the Zabt, or land revenue system, which was based on careful measurement of land holdings and the setting of revenue rates that were fair and efficient. This system enabled the empire to maintain a steady source of income, which in turn allowed Akbar to fund his military campaigns and maintain a large standing army. Akbar's court became a center of learning and culture, attracting scholars, poets, and artists from across the world. The emperor was known for his deep interest in philosophy, science, and religion, and his court became a vibrant hub for intellectual and artistic exchange. Akbar's reforms laid the foundation for the Mughal Empire's continued success under his successors.
Under Akbar, the Mughal Empire reached the height of its power. It became one of the most formidable empires in history, a beacon of military and administrative excellence. Akbar's reign set the stage for the empire's dominance in the Indian subcontinent for over a century, with his successors, Jahangir, Shah Jahan, and Aurangzeb, expanding the empire further and contributing to its rich cultural and architectural legacy. Yet, despite its greatness, the empire would face internal and external challenges, from religious conflicts to regional rebellions. Nevertheless, the foundation laid by Babur and Akbar would ensure the Mughal Empire's place as one of the greatest powers in Indian history. The Mughal Empire, which had once stood as the epitome of grandeur and power, was slowly but inevitably unraveling in the late 17th century. The reign of Aurangzeb, who ascended the throne in 1658, marked the beginning of a dramatic shift that would fundamentally alter the empire's political, religious, and military trajectory. By the time of Aurangzeb's death in 1707, the Mughal Empire was a shell of its former self, fragmented by internal strife, exhausted by years of warfare, and increasingly unable to control the vast regions it had once ruled with unmatched authority. Aurangzeb's policies, in his quest for imperial expansion and religious orthodoxy, led to the alienation of several of the empire's most loyal subjects. His centralizing policies, the repression of religious minorities, and the endless wars in the Deccan did not only stretch the empire's military and financial resources,
But they also sowed the seeds of resistance movements that would chip away at the Mughal Empire's once unshakable foundation. The Marathas, Rajputs, and Sikhs, once either loyal or subordinate allies of the Mughals, now became fierce opponents to the imperial system, setting the stage for the fragmentation of Mughal rule. Aurangzeb's reign was marked by his belief in strict Islamic governance, which often clashed with the more inclusive policies of his predecessors. Unlike Akbar, who had sought to integrate Hindus into the imperial system through marriage alliances, military service, and a policy of religious tolerance, Aurangzeb sought to impose a more orthodox interpretation of Islam across his empire. His decision to reimpose the jizya tax on non-Muslims, which had been abolished by Akbar, was a clear sign of his policy shift. This deeply unpopular tax targeted Hindus, Jains, and other non-Muslim communities, and led to widespread resentment among the empire's largest demographic.
Alongside the jizya, Aurangzeb's destruction of Hindu temples, including the Somnath Temple and parts of the Kashi Vishwanath Temple, alienated large segments of the population. His policies led to the persecution of Sikhs, culminating in the execution of Guru Tej Bahadur in 1675, which inspired the rise of the Khalsa under Guru Gobind Singh and a militant Sikh resistance against Mughal rule. Aurangzeb's religious intolerance, particularly towards Hindus, led to deep sectarian divisions, and his attempts to enforce Islamic orthodoxy strained the fabric of a culturally diverse empire. But it was not just his religious policies that undermined his empire, it was also his relentless military campaigns, especially in the Deccan Plateau, where he engaged in a prolonged war against the Deccan Sultanates and the Marathas. His goal was to annex the Deccan to the Mughal Empire and expand Mughal control over the entire Indian subcontinent, but this overreach stretched the Mughal military to its breaking point. The Marathas had long been a thorn in the side of the Mughals, but it was under Shivaji Maharaj that they truly emerged as a formidable force. Shivaji's guerrilla tactics, his deep knowledge of the Western Ghats, and his ability to rally Hindus against Mughal domination turned the Marathas into a powerful military force. After Shivaji's death in 1680, his successors, including Sambhaji and Rajaram, continued to wage war against the Mughals, but it was Bajirao I, the Peshwa in the early 18th century, who brought the Marathas to the height of their power. Bajirao's military genius and his ability to rally the various Maratha chiefs into a unified force allowed the Marathas to launch successful campaigns not only in the Deccan, but also in the north, even threatening Delhi. The Marathas' hit-and-run tactics, swift cavalry, and deep understanding of terrain allowed them to destabilize Mughal authority. The Third Battle of Panipat in 1761, despite being a defeat for the Marathas, marked the end of Mughal dominance in northern India, signaling the decline of Mughal power and the rise of regional forces. The Rajputs, who had been integrated into the Mughal system through marriage alliances and military service, began to resent Aurangzeb's policies, particularly his religious intolerance and his attempts to curtail their power. The Rajput kingdoms, which had long been semi-independent, started to resist Mughal rule. Under rulers like Maharana Raj Singh of Mewar, the Rajputs launched a series of rebellions against Mughal authority, seeking to regain control over their territories and cultural heritage.
Aurangzeb's oppression of the Rajputs ultimately led to the rise of regional Rajput power, and by the 18th century, the Rajputs had largely reclaimed their autonomy from Mughal control. The decline of Rajput loyalty to the Mughals marked the end of one of the most significant alliances in the empire's history, further weakening Mughal control in the north and west. The Sikh community, which had initially been relatively tolerated by earlier Mughal emperors, found itself increasingly at odds with Aurangzeb's regime. His policies, especially the destruction of Sikh shrines and the execution of Guru Tegh Bahadur, incited the Sikh rebellion and the creation of the Khalsa under Guru Gobind Singh. The Sikhs, previously a peaceful religious community, began to organize as a military force, actively resisting Mughal rule.
By the end of the 17th century, the Sikh forces had established a foothold in the Punjab region, which would later form the Sikh Empire under Maharaja Ranjit Singh in the early 19th century. The rise of the Sikhs as a regional power was a direct challenge to Mughal authority and marked the beginning of the empire's eventual disintegration. The decline of the Mughal Empire, set into motion by Aurangzeb's policies, was not the result of a single event, but rather a combination of internal and external factors. The centralized military campaigns, religious intolerance, and constant overextension of the empire's resources weakened the Mughal state, while regional powers like the Marathas, Rajputs, and Sikhs rose in resistance. These movements of regional autonomy and independence hastened the decline of the once mighty Mughal Empire, leaving India fractured and paving the way for colonial powers to exert their influence. While the Mughal Empire may have fallen, the cultural, political, and architectural legacy left behind by the Mughals continues to shape India today. The Taj Mahal, the Red Fort, and Fatehpur Sikri remain as enduring symbols of an empire that once ruled over much of India and whose rise and fall still reverberate in the nation's collective memory.
India, long a land of immense trade networks, rich cultures, and intricate political systems, found itself at the crossroads of European ambition and Indian resilience. Europe's arrival in India was spurred by the search for wealth, particularly the desire to control the spice trade and other lucrative commodities. By the late 15th century, the Portuguese, under Vasco da Gama, had made the first successful journey to India, opening the sea route around Africa to the Indian Ocean. But the story of European colonialism in India began in earnest with the formation of the British East India Company in 1600, a monumental shift that would change the face of the subcontinent forever. In the early stages, the Portuguese were the dominant European power in India. After Vasco da Gama's successful voyage in 1498, the Portuguese quickly established themselves as the dominant maritime force. They set up their first permanent settlement at Goa in 1510, and their influence spread along the west coast and into the Indian Ocean. The Portuguese were not just traders, they sought to control trade routes and spread Christianity. However, their control was limited to certain coastal areas, and soon other European powers, such as the Dutch and the French, began to challenge their supremacy. The Dutch East India Company, founded in 1602, was primarily concerned with the spice trade and sought to dominate the Malabar coast and the Coromandel coast. The Dutch were more focused on commercial ventures and less on establishing territorial control, but their competitiveness with the Portuguese and later the British helped accelerate the scramble for Indian ports. The French, under the French East India Company, established in 1664, also sought their share, establishing Pondicherry as their main base. However, the arrival of the British in India under the banner of the East India Company would mark a decisive turning point in the region's history. Founded in 1600 by Queen Elizabeth I, the British East India Company began as a commercial venture aimed at establishing trading posts and exploring the Indian subcontinent's wealth in spices, silk, cotton, and tea. The British East India Company was granted a royal monopoly on trade with the East Indies, and quickly began establishing factories in the Bengal region and along the coast of Coromandel.
The initial British-Mughal interactions were centered around trade rather than conquest. The Mughal Empire, under Emperor Jahangir, was still at its zenith during the early 17th century and welcomed the British as a valuable addition to the global trading network. The British, in return, established a permanent trading presence in Surat in 1612, and their operations expanded across the subcontinent. However, the Mughals remained largely uninterested in European colonial ambitions, seeing them primarily as foreign traders rather than potential threats. The Mughal rulers were mainly concerned with internal stability and expanding their influence within the Indian subcontinent. The Mughals granted the British trading privileges, allowing them to establish factories in key regions such as Madras, now Chennai, Calcutta, now Kolkata, and Bombay, now Mumbai. By the mid-17th century, the British East India Company had secured valuable trading posts that were vital for controlling the flow of goods between India and Europe. However, as the Mughal Empire began to show signs of internal weakness after the death of Aurangzeb in 1707, the British East India Company began shifting its focus from trade to political engagement, eager to capitalize on the power vacuum created by the weakening Mughal authority. In 1757, the Battle of Plassey marked a turning point in the British East India Company's trajectory. The battle, fought between the forces of the East India Company, led by Robert Clive, and the Nawab of Bengal, Siraj-ud-Dowlah, is often viewed as the beginning of British dominance in India. The battle itself was largely an outcome of political intrigue. Mir Jafar, a general in Siraj-ud-Dowlah's army, betrayed his Nawab in exchange for the position of Nawab of Bengal. With Clive's forces supported by Mir Jafar's defection, the company emerged victorious.
Though the battle itself was relatively small in scale, the consequences were immense. Bengal, one of the wealthiest regions of India, came under British control, and the East India Company gained the financial resources necessary to further its military expansion. Following Plassey, the company's influence spread rapidly, as the British exploited their position to not only dominate trade, but also to control vast territories in India, setting the stage for the complete colonization of India over the next century. The victory at Plassey was only the beginning of the East India Company's rise to power. Over the next decades, the British would continue to use a combination of diplomacy, military force, and strategic alliances to increase their control over India. The Maratha Confederacy, once a formidable rival, would weaken under British pressure, and the Rajputs and other regional kingdoms would fall into the company's sway. By the early 19th century, the East India Company was no longer merely a trading monopoly. It had evolved into a political and military power that would control vast swaths of India, with the British Crown taking direct control in 1858 after the Indian Rebellion of 1857. The East India Company's shift from commercial enterprise to colonial power was completed, forever altering the history of India. The British East India Company set the foundation for nearly 200 years of British rule in India. Its origins as a trading venture transformed it into one of the most powerful colonial enterprises in history, with the Battle of Plassey serving as the crucial moment when British influence in India was firmly established. The company's rise from economic monopoly to political ruler reshaped India's economic landscape, with profound impacts on Indian society, culture, and government that would resonate for generations. The British legacy in India, rooted in the East India Company, laid the groundwork for both India's future struggles and eventual independence.
The end of the Mughal Empire and the rise of British colonial rule in India are two of the most pivotal moments in Indian history. By the early 19th century, the once great Mughal Empire had fragmented into a shadow of its former self. Bahadur Shah Zafar, the last Mughal emperor, was little more than a figurehead, his authority largely ceremonial and confined to a small area around Delhi. The Mughal Empire's decline was a complex process, deeply tied to political instability, economic exhaustion, and the external pressures of the rising British East India Company. By the time Bahadur Shah Zafar ascended the throne in 1837, the empire was already in a state of disrepair. The empire, once unified under emperors like Akbar, had splintered into factions, with regional rulers asserting their power and often ignoring the Mughal court.
The empire's military had weakened and political control had been ceded to the British, who were rapidly expanding their influence. The Mughal administration, once a highly sophisticated system under rulers like Shah Jahan and Akbar, had become corrupt and inefficient. The Nawabs, or regional rulers, once loyal vassals of the Mughal emperor, had grown increasingly independent, seeking alliances with the British East India Company. The British capitalized on this fragmentation, using a combination of economic incentives, military prowess, and diplomatic maneuvering to secure control over vast portions of India. The Mughal emperor's control was further undermined by Aurangzeb's prolonged wars in the Deccan, which drained the empire's resources. The constant need for revenue and the expansion of the empire created administrative chaos, leading to rebellions and a lack of effective governance in key territories. By the time Zafar, the Mughal court had lost its former power and the British had already established their dominance in key regions such as Bengal, Bombay, and Madras. In 1857, the simmering discontent of Indian soldiers, sepoys, within the British East India Company's army erupted into what would be known as the First War of Indian Independence or the Indian Rebellion of 1857. The rebellion was not merely a military mutiny, but a nationwide uprising that saw the convergence of multiple grievances, from the sepoys' religious and cultural discontent over British policies, such as the introduction of the Enfield rifle cartridges, to the economic exploitation and social injustice faced by ordinary Indians.
The rebellion began in Meerut, where Indian soldiers, angered by the cartridge scandal, mutinied against their British officers. The rebellion quickly spread to Delhi, where Bahadur Shah Zafar was drawn into the conflict. Though he was largely a symbolic figurehead, his position as the Mughal emperor made him the rallying point for Indian forces resisting British rule. Zafar's role was largely ceremonial. He had little military power, but his involvement in the rebellion symbolized the last stand of the Mughal dynasty against British colonialism. In Delhi, the rebels, supported by local rulers, fought fiercely to expel the British. However, the British forces, under Sir Colin Campbell, eventually recaptured Delhi after months of siege. Bahadur Shah Zafar was captured, and after a public trial, he was exiled to Rangoon, present-day Yangon, marking the official end of the Mughal Empire in 1858. The British suppression of the rebellion led to the formal dismantling of the Mughal Empire. The British East India Company, which had ruled much of India with military and administrative control, was dissolved in the wake of the rebellion's aftermath. In 1858, the British government took direct control of India through the Government of India Act, marking the beginning of the British Raj. India was no longer under the control of a private company. It was now a formal British colony. The Mughal dynasty, which had once ruled over much of India for nearly 3 centuries, was officially ended with the exile of Bahadur Shah Zafar. The British Raj was born from the ashes of the Mughal Empire, ushering in a new era of colonial rule that would last until 1947. The British Crown now directly administered India, and the Mughals' legacy, though politically eclipsed, would live on in the architecture, culture, and social fabric of India.
The end of the Mughal Empire and the consolidation of British power in India were intrinsically linked. The Mughal decline created a vacuum of power which the British East India Company was quick to fill, exploiting the discontent and divisions within Indian society. The Indian Rebellion of 1857, while ultimately crushed, marked the final stand against British rule and set the stage for India's eventual fight for independence. As the British Raj took shape, the impact of the Mughal legacy remained. The Mughal architecture, administrative systems, and cultural amalgamation had already imprinted themselves deeply on India's identity, influencing everything from language to art and religion. While the Mughal Empire may have ended in 1857, its historical and cultural influence would shape India's path forward, even as British colonialism laid its claim to the subcontinent for the next 90 years. India's history is an endless tapestry,
woven with the threads of ancient cultures, empires, and the rise and fall of powers that shaped the trajectory of the world. The subcontinent's journey, which began with the Indus Valley Civilization over 5,000 years ago, is one of the longest and most complex in human history. From its advanced urban planning, sophisticated governance systems, and thriving trade networks, the Indus Valley laid the groundwork for the rise of subsequent civilizations that would influence the development of the world. The Vedic period, emerging after the decline of the Indus Valley, marked the birth of Hinduism, Buddhism, and the concept of karma, which continue to be central to the cultural fabric of India and the world. The Vedic texts, the Upanishads, and the Bhagavad Gita have inspired generations of philosophers and religious thinkers, offering profound insights into human nature and the cosmos. The caste system, though controversial and evolving over the centuries, began to take root during this time and became an enduring social structure that has shaped India's society. India's history flourished under successive great empires, each leaving an indelible mark on its culture and governance. The Mauryan Empire, under the leadership of Chandragupta Maurya and Ashoka, was the first to unite the vast subcontinent. Ashoka's conversion to Buddhism after the Kalinga War set a precedent for the pursuit of peace and non-violence, principles that continue to resonate in India and the world.
The Mughal Empire, which began with Babur's victory at the Battle of Panipat in 1526, brought an era of architectural grandeur and cultural synthesis. Under emperors like Akbar, Shah Jahan, and Aurangzeb, India experienced remarkable developments in architecture, including the creation of the Taj Mahal, and in the arts, blending Persian and Indian traditions to create a unique cultural milieu. However, by the late 17th century, the empire's overextension and internal conflicts paved the way for regional powers to assert themselves and, eventually, British colonialism. The arrival of the British East India Company in the early 17th century marked the beginning of a new chapter in Indian history, one that would bring with it colonial rule, economic exploitation, and significant social upheaval. Over the course of 2 centuries, the British slowly consolidated their control over India through military conquest, divide-and-rule tactics, and political manipulation. The Indian Rebellion of 1857, though ultimately unsuccessful, was a pivotal moment in Indian history. It symbolized the first major attempt by Indians to resist colonial domination and marked the beginning of a nationalist movement that would eventually lead to independence. Figures like Mahatma Gandhi, Subhash Chandra Bose, and Jawaharlal Nehru would later build on this resistance, leading India to its hard-won freedom in 1947. India's post-independence journey has been nothing short of remarkable. From the aftermath of colonial rule, India emerged as a newly independent republic, facing challenges of immense proportions: poverty, partition, linguistic diversity, and the task of creating a unified democratic state. Yet, India's resilience, guided by the principles of democracy, secularism, and non-violence, helped it transform into the world's largest democracy, a thriving economic powerhouse, and a cultural beacon. India has risen to prominence on the global stage, contributing significantly to fields such as information technology, space exploration, medicine, and arts. Its democratic institutions and vibrant civil society continue to be a source of inspiration to countries around the world striving for freedom, justice, and equality.
India's legacy transcends its borders, from its philosophical and religious contributions to its profound influence on science, literature, and art. Yoga, Ayurveda, and the spiritual teachings of figures like Buddha and Gandhi have inspired millions globally, while India's festivals such as Diwali and Holi continue to be celebrated worldwide. India's historical evolution is not just a chronicle of its past, but a living, breathing story that continues to evolve. Its influence on global culture and politics is undeniable, with its rich history and traditions shaping the modern world in ways both profound and far-reaching. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as interesting and even more intriguing as can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.